Are you riding the blood glucose roller coaster? That's what you are going to learn today. And if you discover that there might be some space for improvement, I will teach you how you can prevent diabetes with modifiable lifestyle changes. But first of all, we are going to look at the signs and symptoms. So signs are what the medical professionals can observe on your body or from the blood test results. And symptoms is what you feel. So that is your subjective feeling. I will show you which testing biomarkers are the best to prevent diabetes and insulin resistance. And we will look at some hidden sugars. Sugar is everywhere and has many names. And I will teach you how to read the labels and navigate through the marketing field that is bombarding us with all the tricks. And I will also introduce low carbohydrate protocol in case you discover you need it. Let's start with some numbers. About 537 million adults across the world have diabetes. And just imagine how many other millions are insulin resistant or pre-diabetic. And as you can see, the numbers are going to grow, but you are here because you don't want to belong to this group. You want to prevent it. So as a first thing, let's look at the different types of diabetes and what you can do or cannot do about it. So the first one is the pre-diabetes, this pre-diabetic state that majority of my clients are already reaching. And that's the insulin resistance. And we will focus on this one today. The second type is type 1 diabetes. And this one is autoimmune disease, irreversible, when you need to inject insulin. Very often, this can be already small children, as you can see on the screen. And one of the signs and symptoms is feeling thirsty all the time, losing the weight drastically without even wanting to lose the weight. In this autoimmune type, it means that pancreas, the organ that is producing insulin, is damaged, attacked by the own cells. So that's why it's autoimmune disease. Type 2 diabetes is the opposite. People are not losing weight. People are gaining weight. And there are many reasons why people develop type 2 diabetes. We will talk about it as well. And then we have gestational diabetes. This develops usually during the pregnancy. And then the woman comes back to normal. However, the research shows that these women are the contestants for the diabetes type 2. So even here, prevention is very important. One condition, many causes. One cause, many conditions. This is a typical motto from the functional medicine. And why we talk about it? Because there are many other conditions connected to diabetes. It goes hand in hand with other chronic diseases. So diabetes is a chronic metabolic disease. And the biggest culprit, 70% of the time, is stress. Psychological stress, chemical and mechanical. The second reason might be pancreas. There might be some obstacle. The beta cells are not producing sufficient amount of insulin. We spoke about it in diabetes type 1. But sometimes they produce way too much of the insulin as a result of our dietary habits. And then the pancreas also gets depleted and damaged and doesn't work anymore. Insulin resistance. This is actually when the cells say no more and they resist to the action of the insulin. And I will show you the pictures later on. Hyperglycemia. This is what I have. I inherited it. So when I eat a larger amount of sugar, I will have violet fingers. I will be shaking from freezing because the sugar goes up and my body is not able to cope with it. Maybe you have something similar. Sedentary lifestyle, of course, because sugar, the glucose that is absolutely everywhere, needs to be utilized. That is a fuel. But if you are like me, sitting in front of the screen, the biggest part of your day, then you don't really need the glucose because you are not utilizing it. So sedentary lifestyle is one of the culprits of the diabetes. Environmental toxins, because they mimic hormones and they might cause hormonal imbalance. Poor diet, obviously, when we are choosing ultra-processed food. We eat very quickly. There is no mindfulness and it's not clean food. The body keeps the score, it will remember, and it might help in the formation of the diabetes. And excess belly fat. And why? Because belly fat is an endocrine organ. It produces hormones like leptin, and it can cause leptin resistance. We will talk about it as well. So what are other signs and symptoms? Do you sometimes feel fatigue already in the morning, even though you had quite a long sleep? Do you experience this drowsiness in the I wake up once or even twice during the night and I need to urinate. There is no massive amount of the urine. It's just this sensation. But some of them also urinate a lot. They have dry mouths and they feel thirsty all the time. So you see these people that carry the bottle of water with them and need a sip all the time. I'm not saying drinking is very important, 2.5 to 3 liters of liquid every single day, but there shouldn't be dry mouths and thirst. So think about it. Is this you? Tingling hands and feet. That's another typical sign and symptoms. But this might be also a symptom of B vitamin deficiency or overdose. Remember, one condition, many causes, one condition. Dizziness. Does it happen to you that you wake up and you feel dizzy or you feel like the floor is moving with you? Might be a sign of blood glucose imbalance. Slow wound healing. And that is typical for diabetes. So you might scratch yourself and it's just not healing. Or you have some patches and dry skin on your feet, on your elbows, or you have noticed other signs on your skin. I will show you some pictures as well. Irritability when you skip a meal. Yeah, you just cannot do the intermittent fasting, even though you know it's beneficial for the anti-aging. All you do after is thinking about food and you are always craving carbs. It's not broccoli, it's not meat, it's carbohydrates, bread, pasta, something sweet. And you wake up at night for no reason. You don't feel psychological stress. You are actually satisfied in your life. But why do you wake up? Because you have hypoglycemia and then the cortisol wakes you up. So again, one condition, many causes, one cause, many conditions. Polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS. This is a condition that is connected to having multiple cysts or follicles in the ovaries, but none of them is growing, and therefore the ovulation does not happen. Or sometimes the ovulation happens, but after 35, 40, 45 days. And women might have more testosterone because there is an enzyme aromatase that instead of making estrogen to grow the follicle and have a healthy menstrual cycle, it creates more testosterone. And how does it feel with more testosterone? Losing the hair, growing the hair. So there is not this peachy skin, like little bit of fluff, but there are black hair on the face, on the chest, on the neck, acne, and so on. And this is very often connected to insulin resistance and in future diabetes. High blood pressure. Why? Because glucose And this is in osmosis. So this molecule, glucose, brings more water into the blood, which increases the blood pressure. High cholesterol. Why? Because by having too much of the glucose floating around, the liver says, what do I need to do with it? I will repackage it into LDL, the low density lipoprotein, and I will store it for later in the abdominal fat. So it is not the fat in the thighs or in the bum, which is a sign of fertility for women, but it's rather in the abdominal area around the liver and around the organs, where there is this belly fat, the tire around the body. Here I highlighted breath smells sweet. And that is similar to stress, because stressed people, when they have high levels of cortisol, which they actually have then high levels of glucose, when you stay next to them and when they speak, you can smell this sweetness from their breath. But you can actually even sometimes taste it. If you have ever done intermittent fasting, fasting for 20 hours or 24 hours, and you were releasing ketones, you also had the sweetness in your mouth and your breath changed. This is typical for the insulin and hypoglycemia and hyperglycemia as well. Difficulty to lose weight. Why? Because insulin is anabolic hormone. And when insulin is high in pre-diabetic state, insulin resistance, and the type 2 diabetes, it will never allow you to lose weight. Underactive thyroid. So we should never only blame one endocrine system, like one gland. But if you have underactive thyroid, therefore you are not producing enough of the T3 and T4, you can see it in your blood tests. That also sends the signals, for example, to ovaries not to work, and to hypothalamus and the other organs in the body not to work in a proper way. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And this is very often caused by fructose, alcohol, eating too much of the fruit. And I will share with you later on that the fructose is really everywhere, especially in the processed food. Dementia and depression, they also go hand in hand with diabetes. Why? Because then there is inflammation in the brain, and depression as well, because it has impact on the neurotransmitters. So you can see it might start with depression and then you develop diabetes or pre-diabetic state. You first start with the pre-diabetic state, and later on you might develop other comorbidities, underactive thyroid, or, for example, depression. So when you go to the doctor, what could be the signs? So what are really the signs on the body? So one of them, it's dark patches. And the dark patches, it can be on your elbows, but very often it's also like around the neck. So observe yourself. Skin patches and shiny skin. So this is really, I didn't want to put here all the pictures, but this is like a really shiny skin. And there are like patches with different colors, skin tags. So this is what I put here. So really it starts on the neck, and then it's underarm and groins, for example. So again, observe is you any tiny skin tags growing. Male pattern baldness in women. So it basically starts, you are losing the hair in here, and then a little bit in here. That's a typical sign, and it's also connected to the aromatase and the female hormones. Excessive sweating, that's a sign of a pre-diabetic state. Acne and boils. So here again, it comes to the testosterone, higher testosterone in women, and boils, abscess, acne. It can be on the face, on neck, or the front. Rosacea. So it's this it's like a butterfly red inflammation, cholesterol deposits that can be even around the eyes. It can be like milia, but very often it's on the eyelid. This is typical for the diabetes. Ulcers and open wounds. These pictures I really didn't want to present to you. Cracked heels, and that also the infection can enter in. Retinopathy. And why? Again, it's this blood pressure that comes into the eyes, and it causes the eye disease. So retinopathy, neuropathy as well. You might have either like pain in your legs, or you might lose the feeling, the sensation, and then the renal disease. Why? Because again, this amount of sugar and the water that should be filtered through the kidneys, it is too much. And then the kidneys will say, look, I cannot just filter all this sugar out of the body, and it just gives up. And so another test that the doctor would be doing is, for example, the urinary test. If there is sugar or ketones in the urine, that's typical diabetes. So now let's see. You might be saying, like, I don't eat really any sugar. But let me just say that sugar is absolutely everywhere. And it has many names: xylitol, mannitol, fructose, dates, nectar. Every time when you see like rice nectar, or agave syrup being absolutely worse, coconut sugar, carob, lactose, which is in dairy products, all this is sugar. And so how can you distinguish in between the sugar? So we have monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. So mono, it's a single molecule. And imagine it like one stone, one ring, one pearl. It's like one molecule. And this molecule very quickly absorbs into the bloodstream. But when we have a chain, polysaccharides, our body has to do some work and needs to break it down. So polysaccharides, it's, for example, starch. Starch, it's in potatoes, basically any root vegetable, because it grows in the soil and it needs to store all this energy for growing up. Yeah, so it's many poly sugars connected together. But in the end, when it's broken down from this chain, it's still glucose, it's still sugar. Disaccharide, like lactose, basically everything that finishes with "ose" is sugar. So when you read the labels, lactose, maltose, everything is sugar, maltose in the beer. So lactose, it's two molecules. It's galactose and glucose connected together, disaccharide. So you, with enzyme lactase, you chop it off and you have two single molecules. But the question is, do we really need glucose? Well, our brain loves glucose and we love it because it acts on the opioid centers in our brain, and it helps us to release serotonin, the happy hormone. That's why we are so hooked on sugar. And the life without sugar is hard. But in theory, we don't need sugar at all. Because maybe you have heard about ketogenic diet, and that's mostly eating fat and some protein and very small amount of sugar. So we can survive without sugar easily because our body is smart. Our body, in a process called gluconeogenesis, it can produce sugar from other sources, for example, from protein or from fat. So we don't need any glucose, but we like it. So what is the consequence of eating sugar all the time? It's a slow metabolism because your body doesn't need to do too much. And it is always going to prefer sugar. But fat, long molecules of fat, or protein, long molecules of amino acids, it's such a hard work to chop it to small pieces and break it down. So sugar is the easiest option, and our brain will always send us signal to eat it. But if you eat sugar, you need a little helper for that, because sugar cannot enter into the cell on its own. It needs a hormone, this chemical messenger called insulin. And insulin is an anabolic hormone. It's a builder. Whenever pancreas releases insulin, it's going to save everything that's in the bloodstream. And I will teach you later on how to combine the food. So insulin needs to unlock the cell, and then the glucose comes inside. So if you eat every 2 or 3 hours, and you are always eating something that has carbohydrates, some sugar in it, you always spike insulin, and therefore you cannot lose any weight. So insulin is indispensable in this process, but we shouldn't ask our body to produce it on a regular basis, like every 2 hours. And now we come to this beautiful picture, because I love to educate you, entertain you, and encourage you to make a change. So we are looking at the cell. So here, the red balls, it's a glucose, sugar. So let's say that you just had croissant with Nutella and freshly squeezed orange juice. All of that is just pure sugar with some fat in it. And so you have in your bloodstream lots of sugar. And then pancreas needs to produce insulin. And you can see that every cell, every single cell in our body has receptors. And the blue ball insulin needs to attach to the receptor, and only then the cell will open the gate, and the red ball, glucose, can enter into the cell, and then it will go into mitochondria, where in the Krebs cycle it's going to produce ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is the currency of the body. And we pay with this money to other cells to produce something. But what happens is that the cells, if you eat every 2 or 3 hours and you are snacking all the time, they have to take this glucose inside the cell and work and work and work. Until one day they say, no more. And they close the receptors, so the door is closed. And now we have in the bloodstream lots of glucose and lots of insulin. But this sends the message to the brain, and the brain will say, hey, we have here hyperglycemia, I don't like this, and sends the signal to the pancreas to make even more insulin to remove the glucose. So then we have even more insulin, but if the cell said no, and they are not opening the gate, this is the insulin-resistant cell. And so what happens is that the blood comes to the liver, and the liver will say, okay, I will repackage it as a fat cells, and I will store it for later. But the later never comes, because then you eat another snack, another friends will make apéro, and you will have a beer and wine and eat something, little bit of cake, because you live only once, dolce vita. And one day, the doctor will tell you that you have diabetes because you feel the fatigue, you are overweight, and so on. And so you can see that slowly, slowly, the body will keep the score. And so what can you do about it? Well, many people, so the good news is that you can reverse type 2 diabetes, providing that the pancreas is not damaged, okay? You are just going to give pancreas a break so that it does not release the insulin. So what we know is that, for example, when you can consume fat, and that's why ketogenic diet for diabetic people and people that have cancer is their choice, because what they will do is that they will take the fatty acids in the process of oxidation, and especially if they supplement, for example, with L-carnitine, that is helping them to bring the fatty acids, the energy, and turn it into ATP, turn it into energy. So that's the one way you can do it. But otherwise, if there is insulin and you still consume carbohydrates, the fat is going to come through the Krebs cycle, and if you don't have sufficient amount, it's going to be stored as a fat. Yeah, so you really need to choose the oxidation pathway without carbohydrates. And then we are also using protein. So we need insulin even to break down protein, but very small amounts. Mostly we need insulin when we eat carbohydrates, yeah? And so even, for example, glycogen, which is a storage of sugar in the liver and in the muscle. So when you, for example, decide not to eat for 2 or 3 days and you will still go for a run, if you have sufficient amount of muscle mass, this glycogen is going to be used as a source energy directly in your muscle. So that's pretty good. And yeah, so you can see avoiding carbohydrates and eating more fat and protein and obviously vegetable. But I want to also show you, when you speak to the doctor, which tests is good to do. Maybe you remember that we were talking about case study Jenny in the cardiometabolic module. And that was about how to prevent the cardiovascular disease. And I was showing you her blood test results because she has some markers that are already out of control. So she also had insulin resistance. How do I know that she has insulin resistance? So the most important marker for me is HbA1c. I'm circling around and you can see that. So this is glycosylated hemoglobin. So what basically happens, this marker shows you what happens in the bloodstream in past 120 days. So hemoglobin is a protein in red blood cells. And if the glucose, if you have constantly glucose in your bloodstream and it's not going into the cells because you are insulin resistant, this glucose, it's like a glue, it's like a chewing gum, like a syrup that attaches to the red blood cells. But then the red blood cells cannot do their job, which means to deliver the oxygen to the cells in the body. Yeah. And I can see the percentage. So let's say that optimal is to be around 4.995. If you are, let's say, 40 plus. If you are younger, the number is going to be lower, more around like 4.8. But you can see that she was 5.9. So this is a Swiss range. But I can tell you that in functional medicine, anybody who is above 5.7 has insulin resistant and is in a diabetic state. So she has 5.9. And her doctor in the Swiss system would wait until she reaches 6.5, and then they would give her a drug called metformin. So metformin will only manage the disease, the diabetes. So diabetes is 6.5, okay? 5.7 is the pre-diabetic state, insulin resistant. So she is already in the insulin resistant. So it's one marker that you would want to do. It's done everywhere around the world. It's very well-known marker. And then, of course, fasting glucose. But fasting glucose, it's what happens in your bloodstream only in that particular moment. And if you feel stressed, if, for example, you are worried about going to the doctor or you hate when they are drawing the blood, and this increases the cortisol, it can also increase the glucose. So glucose is not the best indicator for me from the functional medicine point of view. Then I want to see the fasting insulin. Why? Because if, for example, the fasting insulin was on 0, that would be the type 1 diabetes because there is no insulin whatsoever. The pancreas, the beta cells in the pancreas are completely damaged. However, the type 2 diabetes with overweight people or older people, that is increased. Yeah, so that's the insulin resistance. So let's see, where is the marker insulin? Aha, here on the bottom. So when you look completely on the bottom, the second pillar, you can see that her insulin markers, I just want to move it and yeah, look down. No. Her insulin was 95.5 without eating. She was completely fasting. She didn't have any dinner. She didn't eat anything over the night. And right away in the morning, she went for the test. So in a Swiss range, 14 is the lowest. Why? Because normally they are testing insulin after the food. This is not the test for the fasting insulin, or they don't do it usually as a fasting insulin. We do it in a functional medicine. Yeah. So normal optimal is between 3, 4, 5, but she has 95. This is a typical insulin resistance. And then there is also a marker called HOMA, which I think she probably did not do. But if HOMA is over 2, that is insulin resistance and diabetes. Yeah, so it's basically comparing. It takes the millimoles of the glucose times the insulin divided by 405, and it's going to show you the number. Yeah, so as I say, you need to be below 2, preferably around 1. So that's the HOMA, insulin resistance. And we are also looking at triglycerides. So you can see she did not eat anything, but her triglycerides are 1.9. This would be normally expected after eating a large meal full of fat, yeah, because triglycerides is basically like the spillover from the food. So her body, the liver, cannot even repackage the glucose, cannot even take the fat. It's just totally exhausted. So that's the triglycerides. And we can look at her LDL, which is the low density lipoprotein, which I can see that is extremely high as well. She has 6 and it should be under 3. So under, like usually 2.5 or around 2. This is a 46-year-old woman. So this is extreme. And the last thing that I like to check from the functional medicine point of view are the inflammatory markers. So for example, for me, even her, so CRP 4.2, that's a sign of inflammation. And this was not even the high sensitivity CRP, it was already high. She had very high uric acid. This is a sign of inflammation. And she had high, she had other marker high. What was it? She has like a high protein, that would be, she had actually low homocysteine, but there was like another marker of inflammation that was high. Okay, I cannot see it because the test was much larger, but CRP and uric acid and actually, yeah, ferritin. So we can look at her ferritin. So normally you might think about ferritin as, let me just try to find the ferritin. Here it is, 116. So you might know ferritin as a storage of the iron, and very often women have low ferritin levels. However, ferritin is an inflammatory marker. And in her case, it was 116, which is much higher than a majority women have. So this was a clear indication for me that she has insulin resistance and inflammation, actually metabolic syndrome. But here I want to show you tests that I did for myself, because I have a family history of obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia, what else we have? Rheumatoid arthritis, which is autoimmune disease. And so my metabolic test showed 3 important genetic polymorphisms, so basically the mistakes that I have in my genes. One of them is FTO, and this is a fat mass and obesity associated gene. So I have a fat gene, you know, when you hear people saying, oh, I'm fat because I have a fat gene. I have a confirmation that I have a fat gene. No wonder if everybody in my family has it. The second one was this PPARG, which is a lipid storage and insulin resistance. So I have a genetic predisposition for insulin resistance, no wonder, and even lipid storage. And I, for example, have melia on my face, and I had many things, and I was always wondering, like, why I eat so healthy, I do all these things as a functional medicine nutritionist. Yeah, it's the gene. But let's say that genes are loaded in the gun, but it's the environment that pulls the trigger, and therefore all the environmental factors are modifiable. I can prevent the release of these genes, so switching on and off, and this is called epigenetics. And the third gene that I have is a glucose intolerance and hyperinsulinemia. And I already told you before that, like many years ago, actually happens to me quite often. Even 2 weeks ago, I was in my office and I had only a little breakfast at 9 o'clock, and it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I felt hungry, but I was thinking, no, I still have one more meeting with a client. I have to go to the post office and then I will cycle home. I live in France, 40 minutes uphill, and that I will not buy the lunch. I will do all the work that I said. I will cycle home and I will eat at home. But I arrived home at 5 o'clock and then I ate the meal and the hyperglycemia came again, which was violet fingernails, feeling very cold. So even if I put 2 sweaters on, I just cannot warm up and I'm shaking. This is a typical hyperinsulinemia and hyperglycemia. And I have a genetic predisposition for this. And then I did another test, which is glycomark. And that also showed that I suffer with this blood glucose imbalances. And I also did another test that was for the leptin. My leptin is very low. There might be 2 reasons, because I don't carry too much of the body fat. So I really do hard not to carry any body fat, but also leptin is a satiety hormone. And if the leptin levels are low, there is always going to be hungry. You are always going to be hungry. And I actually do feel hungry very often. I want to entertain you here because people think like, but, you know, you cannot have the fat gene and you are a nutritionist and you just have this bikini body. Yes, but I have it because I have done all the tests and I know what to eat. This was me when I was 21 and my mom came to visit me in Rome and she nearly collapsed because I gained 16 kilos in 1 year. Change quickly because I don't like to show this picture. But I want to tell you that I have the experience of being overweight and I know how hard it is to lose the weight. And it's only the body that I have now. It's only because I know what to eat and why. And that's what I want to teach you now. So let's come to the practical part. So what spikes the insulin the most is the carbohydrates. I already told you. And here I made a picture. So more pluses means that it spikes insulin even more. So if you are eating only carbohydrates, so you will, for example, have this croissant, pain au chocolat, and freshly squeezed orange juice, and then we will have cappuccino, which has lactose, and it's going to increase the adrenaline, and adrenaline will increase the insulin, the cortisol, and cortisol will increase even more glucose. You will be in a vicious cycle. So what you need to do is to combine the food in a way that you don't spike insulin that much. So if you eat protein only, as I said, we need insulin, but look at it. It has only 2 pluses. If you eat fat only, it's not going to have any impact on insulin because we don't need insulin to break down and utilize fat. So now look at when you combine carbs and fat. So for example, Nutella, which is basically fat and sugar, it's also going to spike the insulin. And insulin, as an anabolic hormone, wants to save everything. And then it will take even this fat and store it as a fat on the belly. If you combine protein and fat, so what is protein and fat? Look, every meat, every egg, every source, animal source protein is always going to be the combination of protein and fat. The Mother Nature is smart and we should try to do what the Mother Nature makes. So combining protein and fat, it actually increases leptin, satiety hormone, and it increases the insulin only a little bit. The same is, for example, for high protein and carbs. So you can still eat carbohydrates because if you are athlete, if you are young, if you want to get pregnant, if you are actually slim, and you move, like your job is moving around, then high protein, like for example, chicken, and low carbs, like sweet potato or what is here, quinoa, buckwheat, is a great combination. If you combine high carbs and low protein, it is the highest in plus. And low carbs and medium protein, it's okay. Yeah, so it's these different combinations. And now let's get practical, and or let's actually expand on this. So how many carbohydrates do you need per day? And this is a good question. It depends on how physically active you are. But let's say that you are sedentary and you maybe exercise like 40 minutes per day like me, and then you go 3 times a day for a walk, and maybe like you do 10,000 steps, yeah, which is the minimum, 10,000 steps and 40 minutes of exercise. In that case, on a low carbohydrate diet, you would need 80 grams per day. But let's say you tell me, but I want to lose weight. So if low carb is just to keep you where you are, then you need to maybe slightly decrease the carbs to 70, 60, 50, whatever. But you work with your dietitian or functional medicine nutritionist on the protocol for you based on your results. So ketogenic would be only 20 grams per day. And there's also difference between high glycemic index, sometimes they say it, and glycemic load. So if you squeeze the orange juice and you remove the fiber, then you have high glycemic index because there's only pure sugar. But if you eat the orange as a whole with the fiber is going to lock the sugar inside and it cannot be released into the bloodstream so quickly. So there is the load, but it's going to be released slowly. It also depends what time of the day you are eating carbohydrates. So if you, for example, eat it at the lunchtime and then you are going to be physically active, it's perfectly fine. If you are eating pasta at 8 o'clock in the evening as a dinner, and then you are going to lie on a sofa and watch TV, it might not be the best choice. But the most important is the intention, like why do you eat what you eat? Like what is the reason? What is the outcome of that? Imagine about the car. So you load the car with the fuel because your intention is to drive to Prague, 900 kilometers from my house. But I cannot load the fuel into my car if I'm not driving it. Yeah? Makes sense. The same is with the body. So think about the food as a fuel. It needs to have the function. So why are you going to eat? Is it emotional overeating and it will store it as a fat? Or is it because you need it as a fuel? So it's all about the lifestyle approach and sometimes the limiting beliefs. And I, in my clinical practice, see this with people all the time. They tell me they go to Pilates class and they need to eat banana before that. No, trust me. You do not need banana, the 250 calories for 1 hour of Pilates or yoga. Your body has sufficient amount of calories to make you flow through the yoga sequence with ease. Okay, so always think about it. Am I running a marathon again in 4 hours? Then yes, you will need more glucose. So the art of label reading, this is crucial. When I go with my clients to the shop, because we make it practical, and I show them, look, every time when you take the package, you need to read what's in it. So they sometimes show me, oh, I buy the puffed rice cakes and I put like some peanut butter and a banana on the top of it. Or they show me this quinoa bread. It's gluten-free, it's healthy, everything looks perfect. But look at it. It says quinoa, but actually it's made from the rice and there is only 40% of the quinoa and there is some sugar added as well. So the added sugar is very little. So it's only 2 grams. But look at the total carbohydrate. So remember, we were talking about polysaccharides. That is the carbohydrate. And so if in 100 grams, which is half of this package, is 77 grams of carbohydrate, and I told you that on a low carbohydrate, it's 80 grams per day. So just by eating half of this package, you completed your daily dose of carbohydrates. And the same is, for example, with these buckwheat noodles. So they are gluten-free. And I love this company. It's Terasana. But look at it. In 100 grams, which is basically the portion, you are going to have 66 grams of protein. And if you have, another source of protein in your meal, it's just one meal that already gives you the amount. Yeah, so it is all about sugar and the glycemic index. So we are counting it. 100 is a glucose, is the pure sugar. The white powder is 100. But look at that. Dates, which is used as alternative sugar, have glycemic index 103. Maltose, the sugar in beer, 105. Watermelon, 72. Banana, 52. Grapefruit, only 25. Well, no wonder it's not that sweet. Baguette, 95. Rice cake, 73. White rice, 73, and rice cake, 87. That's way too high. So what I want you to, like, even if from this presentation, from this workshop, you take only one thing for you and your children and everybody around you. Stop buying ultra-processed breakfast cereal because it is highly processed, it's puffed. It has been exposed to a high heat. And basically all the sugar is exposed, and that's why this index is so high. And this is in 100 grams. It's like 3 spoons of this with milk that has lactose in it as well. It's a disaster. I would never buy this for my children, but I used to eat it maybe 20 years ago because I didn't know. But you now know. Starchy vegetables. So for somebody who is on a diet and wants to lose weight, I just want to bring to your attention that when you cook things or even actually bake them, it has even more sugar in it, and it is going to spike the insulin, and insulin is the anabolic hormone. But I'm not saying that you should avoid it. I think it's a perfect choice for somebody who, for example, is bloated, has leaky gut, has autoimmune disease. This is a great choice of a carbohydrate in a small quantity. So you can have half of the sweet potato, and then the rest of the plate is green leafy vegetable and some source of protein. Because remember, the most important is the trio. What is the trio? Fat, fiber, and protein. These 3 things should be always on your plate. Everything else is just because you have chosen to eat it, but your body doesn't need it. Pulses for vegans and vegetarians. It's actually a good choice. It's excellent source of the protein, vitamins, and minerals. And when you look at it, for example, lentils or kidney beans or soya beans, they have very small amount of carbohydrates, and they're quite high in protein. If you have difficulty to digest them, you can try to either buy the digestive enzymes that are going to help you to break down the cellulose in it, or you can try to sprout them, and then you can steam them a little bit, especially in the winter. It's good to eat everything that has been warmed up. So, to conclude, one condition, many causes. One cause, many conditions. So in functional medicine, as you now know, everything in the center is mental, emotion, and spiritual. So when we were talking about the stress, increasing the levels of the glucose, and then glucose spiking the insulin, you know that when you want to eat or during the day, you try to get or regulate your emotions, regulate the view, the perspective that you have on your life, and maybe find some spirituality. And when you look at the bottom, all the modifiable lifestyle factors. So sleep, sleep is the most important. Exercise and movement, moving daily. Nutrition, that's what I already told you today. Stress, getting it under control, and relationship. So surrounding yourself with people that motivate you and that inspire you to make the right move. When I was preparing this presentation, all these quotes were coming to my mind. Don't wait until your body breaks. Because, for example, it's the same like with your car. You are taking care of your car. It goes to the regular service. So even you should go to the regular service and see what's hidden in the body. and the body keeps the score. So every little stress or dietary mistake is just keeping it. And then one day, like this, the disease develops. But it was building there for years. So what you seed, you reap. Prevention is better than cure. So what I wanted to take today from this presentation, take small but consistent daily steps. It is all about consistency. So if you, for example, say, I will start the meal with protein and fiber, and then I will have some source of carbohydrate, something sweet. I'm not saying to avoid the sweet stuff completely, but making the choices of what you put into your stomach first might be a good choice. Get tested to know your starting point. With my clients, this works miracles because they come to me and they feel like relatively healthy. They only have a fatigue, little bit of bloating, and they notice some slight change in a hormonal regulation. And then when we get the test back, like Jenny, 46 years old, it makes them to make a change very quickly. Eliminate stressors. Maybe look into intermittent fasting in case you don't have diabetes type 2 yet. So if you are already on a medication or under a medical surveillance, you need to speak to the nutritionist before you do any changes. And just clean eating. Buy everything that you would grow in your garden. Don't buy processed man-made food because there is always some source of carbohydrates or hidden sugar. You can download the list of hidden sugars and you can try to read the labels of your favorite foods and maybe find some other alternatives. And the Mediterranean diet has been shown as one of the most beneficial diets. Thank you and see you very soon.